Next speaker is Dr. Lindsay Olinde. Lindsay has been working on water-related projects for over 20 years, and she's with City of Austin Watershed Protection. Lindsay has been a civil servant as an engineer with WPD for the past 7 years. At Watershed, Lindsay's been passionate about a range of projects. Her work often merges a few of her professional interests, which are pragmatic design, geomorphology, big data, large-scale planning, process improvement, ecology, and community context. Lindsay holds her Bachelor's of Science from Louisiana State University and her Master's from Virginia Tech, also a PhD from UT Austin.
All right. Always nice to have a friendly crowd. So Eric Laux is my supervisor. I am evoking Eric as I stand up here. So imagine him also talking with me. When he asked me to do a review of a program that's been going on for 30 years, I first was like, oh yeah, sure, no problem. But 30 years and really wanting to represent the evolution and the progress that we've made was more involved than I expected. And I want to thank all the people. I had this vision of how I wanted to tell this narrative. And a lot of it is really rich in images because I want you guys, maybe in 10 years, we'll have a whole virtual reality moment where we can all experience the creeks together. But in the meantime, I'm hoping that you guys can kind of experience the images and see what our day-to-day has been like over the past 30 years. So thank you for the team, Ingrid, especially, helping me out with that. Also to the organizers, you guys, there's so much involved, little emails that take time. So thank you for helping. I'm going to go over our fundamentals, the start, the origin story, our team. I'm going to talk about our project scope of the stream restoration program, and then I'll dive into more of the glamorous, moving big dirt piles and equipment and all that, and then we'll end it on the future opportunities. We're nestled in, the stream restoration program is in watershed protection, and our intent is really to make streams safe and stable for our community and the environment. Morgan Byers, legendary stream restoration staff, has a pithy way of just saying SRP provides engineered solutions to protect designated resources from erosion. Some of you who've been with us over the decades have seen that our faces have changed in the group. We've expanded, contracted. Here's a picture of our team in 2013. During the pandemic. And now we are a team of 6. For the people who are in stream restoration now, can you raise your hands so you can kind of see where everybody is? Donald, Charlie, Ingrid, I'll take you, Tom. Eric, where's Katie? Okay, good, thank you, Katie. And we are nestled in watershed protection. Jorge went over some of the reorg that we've been doing. Our division now is in the project design and delivery. For consultants who work with us but haven't fully caught up with our reorg, one other group I was just going to shout out is the floodplain office is now in the planning, monitoring, and compliance. The 4 gears that we tend to use on a day-to-day basis has to do with planning and programs, design and construction, and then technical assistance and supporting policy. Our origin story starts off near where we are right now. So we're in the headwaters of Shoal Creek. Did anybody know that? I didn't. I was thinking we were in Little Walnut. In the 1990s, there was a really dramatic storm with really dramatic flooding and really dramatic erosion. That kicked off the first really erosion-specific bond that happened in 1992. A lot of these projects that were funded by the bond were done in Little Walnut, but also Tannehill, so kind of like central East Austin, where we're starting to get into that Blackland Prairie bluffs. These images are pretty consistent with what those projects covered. That started this database of erosion projects. So this, even though it might be a little bit boring for people who don't love big data like I do, is really important for our entire program. It defines like the pool of problems that we might address. In the early years, we mostly had community concerns, people calling us up saying, hey, we have this problem, hey, we have this problem. So responding to that community concerns. And the community concerns really justified and led a lot of our project selection and justified the establishment of this erosion program in 1994. We realized that we can't just rely on community, so we needed to get a systematic inventory of the streams. We did that through these watershed assessments. So that's going out, taking an inventory, looking at the conditions. The first set of assessments was 17 watersheds in central urban Austin. And that's right where central urban Austin is that transition zone between the resistant bedrock in the Edwards Aquifer and then the kind of more erodible Blackland Prairie. So in that transition zone is where we have all of our development. That's where we wanted to start. Where are we having the problems now? Is anybody here who actually did this work, the creek walking? Also, I can't overstate how amazing this work is. It was so many miles of creek, day in and day out. And we still refer to these binders. There's so many binders. I'll still go and flip through hard copies of binders to get context on a project that I'm doing right now. So this was really important for our database being established. It was main stems and larger tribs, so it wasn't every single creek in Austin, but it was our first kind of blitz through. That led into our first policy, supporting our first policy within watershed. So only council can make policy, so this is our first policy with a capital P, bringing together water quality, erosion control, and flood protection. We expanded our watershed planning to more watersheds, and then in 2012, we went east, knowing that we have this desired development zone, as it was called at the time. And we knew that that was fully in the Blackland Prairie, so super erodible. Eric Stewart, I think you were involved in some of those creek walks. We wanted to see what are the conditions before our development, so urban development, gets there. Was it pristine? No. We have 100 years of legacy, super involved agriculture. If you've heard of the phrase King Cotton, that's right where we are. That study found that we had more head cuts, more instabilities, often because of just the agricultural history. I will pause. I was thinking about this talk, and I was like, my favorite ride at Schlitterbahn is the Lazy River. This talk is not the Lazy River. It might be more like Riffle Pool, but I am going to pause right here for a little pool moment to talk about head cuts. For people who don't know about head cuts, I didn't really know about head cuts that much other than a beautiful waterfall, which is a head cut that moves the geologic time. Head cuts really drive a lot of our projects. This is something that came up in the Northeast, but also in our transition zones. So if you're familiar with Austin, kind of East Austin, Fort Branch, head cuts move quickly, and it doesn't really matter what's on top of the land, it matters what's on the bottom. This is an example of one of the projects that Kelly Rich worked with us on, where a head cut is going through a stream system, through concrete riprap, and I think of them as little mobile land-eating waterfalls. They're evil and sort of stressful to me. A lot of our work is based on this. If you're taking out a grade control, maybe it's tree roots, maybe it's a debris jam, maybe it's a wastewater line. If you are taking out a grade control in a really erodible area, that head cut's going to keep on migrating. If it hits an equilibrium slope, great, but that usually takes a long time, so it'll hit the next hard point. So here are some examples of just head cuts that we try to secure and so that they don't basically eat everything going upstream. Sidebar, for anyone who does like talking about Austin history, ecology, and Blackland Prairie, I did some work with another group, with our ecologist, on the Blackland Prairie watershed. And if you're interested in this, there's a YouTube on it. If you go to our YouTube page, there's also just really great YouTubes from watersheds, so you can learn about salamanders, spills, and they're all super short. So it's kind of like, I can't say that I speak like Ken Burns in it, but I am really proud of the work, and I think it's a nice intersection of a lot of our issues. As we're going through time, we're constantly building our erosion database, but then we're also revisiting existing. So we have 30 years of this expansion and also some of the sites that get more attention because we have more needs there. This gives us a lot of field experience. This field experience, I was just looking at all the images and kind of thinking existentially about what is this field experience? How does that impact our designs? We are constantly, consciously and subconsciously picking up notes. When it's a 30-year program, we're able to go to sites and then look and see over the years how it's how it's continued. We connect with the community often. Having our designers be able to see projects that come in as like an urgent, maybe a community request, and then also bring it into design is really rare and super rewarding. And it also just kind of gives up that unquantifiable sense where we can show up at a project or a erosion or a call and really be able to have a sense of, oh, is this super urgent or is this not urgent? So it's building intuition, which is kind of that professional intuition that we all strive for. And I think that this piece of it really kind of compresses that intuition component. The walking around looking at streams, fixing streams, also have very curious minds. We're not just recording the problems. We're also progressing the policy over the 30 years. So here's an example where Morgan and Mike Kelly were looking at creeks and thinking, wow, we are spending a lot of money trying to save these houses. We need to think of how can we prevent this from happening in the future. So in 2013, wrapped up in the Watershed Protection Ordinance, thank you, Matt, for all your hard work on that, we were able to bring in this concept through technical support of the erosion hazard zone protection. We're doing two things. One, we can't have any utilities in the erosion hazard zone without some kind of protection. We don't want to have to keep chasing more resources to protect. And then two, developments can't make erosion worse in another property. It's not so much you cannot build here, but it's that if you build here, we need to have special protective works going on. Another part where we were constantly trying to progress and refine the program is Morgan was like, we're getting all these databases, we have all these points, we need a better system of ranking and prioritizing them. So we needed a simplified screening score. I try not to use the word problem score because I love a good number, and if I hear a number, I tend to be attached to that number. It seems kind of biblical. So a screening score is what we're gonna call it. And it's really taking this resource value times some likelihood of failure. I'm going to walk through this a little bit. So we had to designate through our master plan resource values, and we have a whole range going from 5 to 100. The highest, as you might expect, would be roads, houses, bridges. We have parkland, and then we have fences and yards. These might not seem really important, but when you're living behind, when you have a fence that's falling in, that's part of your security, that's part of your land. And we do projects that I'll talk about in a second about how we're aggregating our fences to help communities. And then we have, this is really bad incision, right? But the resource is a private wood, so we have it as a low resource value in this program. And the risk in general, super high level, is a geotechnical risk. It might involve plan forms, so is it on the outer side of a bend? Is there vegetation that's helping the bank stabilize? So here's an example where we have a kind of one of the worst case scenarios. We have a bridge, super steep, that gets our highest score, which is 10,000. So we're now continually taking in community concerns. We have our blitzes and our watershed assessment. Something that has happened more recently for the community is that we have a 311 app. If you don't have it, love it, use it, download it. Super easy to make concerns to the city. So that's something that people can do and not have to wait online. You can get an email, and that's been good for the program and just for the city. But one of our biggest criticisms is that a lot of our database is community driven. So we did those snapshots on the main stems and the major tribs, but we're still doing a lot of based on like community calls. So who has the ability to call? Who knows how to call? That's a bias. One of the components that our department is starting to do is equity. And so one of the pilot programs is through the field engineering, doing really cool work where they're doing this equity-based project prioritization protocol pilot. Say that 10 times fast. But what they're doing is they're looking at census tracts with high social vulnerability, going in and just looking at the whole swath of drainage issues. What might be underreported? If you've got a call about one flooded house, there's probably more like 10 flooded houses nearby. I love that Jana Renfro, who's the supervisor, she has a phrase about these kind of projects where it might be forgettable in your career because it doesn't have all the maybe long-term big equipment, but it really makes an impact for those 1, 2, 3 houses that it's right next to. And they can do this within 2 years. So they're kind of curating these lists of designs that can really be cranked out in 2 years and really help people immediately. So our database is over 2,000 sites. Once you get on the database, you're on there forever. We can mark you as repaired, or we can change you, but once you're in it in general. But a lot of those sites are sites that we don't actually cover. So we do not cover when people have kind of egregious encroachments into the floodplain. So if you're going to build a deck in the creek, we are not going to go and try to make sure that it's stable. Another thing that happens with CoA's is that we also don't generally protect site runoff. So if you have a parking lot or a roof that's sort of draining into a local place and then having that erosion happen over the top of the bank, this often happens where you can see a slight dip in the fence line. That's also something, if it's site runoff, it's not stream erosion. What we do cover, again, is a lot of high banks, a lot of kind of legacy impacts of head cuts that have already come through, head cuts that we're actually watching progress. And we have this database now of projects that are in our domain. We have to prioritize which ones get the work done. Which ones are we going to start tackling? We have a screening process, yay, for SOPs. And the way that the screening process starts is that we use those screening scores. We kind of break them up into two different groups. So we have that local site scale, maybe a pocket here, a pocket there. These are smaller, a couple hundred feet. And then we have these larger reach scales, or it might be a few thousand feet. But we don't just take the numbers and just go do the projects. We bring in that field experience. AI is not going to replace us because, again, it's a screening score. We have real people who know the research, who do the research every year. We have kind of these, we might be a little bit grumpy when we're doing it, because it is very intense to go back through all the files and maybe make sure all of our database is QA/QC'd, because we really want to make sure that what we're proposing for the next year and the projects are, in fact, what the reality is versus just a screening score. So that's really important to me. This also lets us be flexible. So we might have a project, long-term, big reach scale that's on the conveyor belt of CIP, but if we're seeing a head cut that's moving fast, like this one, we can do an emergency repair at the same time. So that lets us be really flexible in our annual planning. It also lets us find out, okay, do we have a field engineering that we can just do really quickly, like the where we're just sketching on top of a photo, and maybe we don't even need a survey. So for our site scales, who does the design, usually that's in-house. So that's also something that we're happy to do. It keeps us sort of, how do I say this? CIPs take a while. So you kind of like to get that short-term enthusiasm through in-house design and being able to see something being created. Field engineering, it's even faster. So it's sort of less formal. We have our own in-house survey crew. I think Alonso is here. And then we have our big CIPs, which is really much more formal, tied to the strategic plan. Another piece of our program that is interesting is that we have a MIP integration process. So that means that in 2001, from the very beginning, we wanted to make sure that we weren't hurting another program. So I can't go create this really restored, high roughness stretch of reach if I'm now flooding a house because it's I added so many trees. So we want to make sure we do no harm, and we want to make sure that we're optimizing what we're doing, right? If I'm going to go put in a bunch of blocks to help a house, and they're having drainage issues that are really small and fixable, I want to do that too. I don't want to just say, oh, we're just doing this one thing, right? That's part of the community engagement and community support. One thing for our consultants that is new in the MIP process is that we're also incorporating now our field maintenance conversations at 60% design and safety. When we do our site scale, small scale designs, usually it's our in-house field operations crew or IDIQ. For our simpler, faster field engineering, it goes straight to field ops, and then CIP is typically standard bed. So we have over 400 projects over time across the city, and I want to start getting into what our projects look like. Morgan has a great phrase that he loves to say, from the ponytail days to the long beard now, the right horse for the course, right? So there are times when we have space to lay a slope flat, to let that, maybe have more floodplain connectivity, but there are other times where we really need to harden a surface or a bank. We have a house right there, so that's a constraint that we need to just take each kind of section of a project. And some of our CIPs include lots of different solutions, and some of our in-house can only do one. So that's important. I wanted to go through, I was just curious too, I haven't seen a lot of how the projects have changed over the years. So in the All of our projects did not look like this. Caveat. I did highlight some things that we just don't do anymore for contrast. So we do not install gabions anymore. So gabions are those riprap in cages. They basically are sediment time bombs. Something will break them open and release the sediment. We also tend to not do concrete culverts anymore, or concrete riprap anymore. In the 2000s, our design started to get a little fuzzier, a little greener. This is an example of our boulder toe with some soil lifts and some lovely lush vegetation coming up. We continued that work. We started, instead of using concrete, switching to some fancy block work, which learned recently that the limestone blocks have a lower carbon footprint than concrete. And through those first 15 years, we developed some maybe quirks that our contractors don't love, but a lot of our quirks have to do with what we've seen fail. So our biggest constraint is space. If we're proposing something new, we want to talk about maintenance plans. And then we always have that soft skill of like managing community expectations, managing how it's going to look. We don't have a light hand. So if we're going to do a project, it might be 9 months of a pretty loud project. So kind of preparing people for that whole experience is important. Some of the quirks that we have is that we love riprap. Not just any riprap, we love graded riprap. So when we say, for people who don't deal with or have a love of riprap for us, like we do, we might have a 18-inch riprap D50, which is a median. And so that means we actually want to see a pretty big gradient so that we can have them lock the way we expect them to. So we do a lot of riprap sizing, and it does drive our contractors a little crazy, but we think it's important because we've seen projects fail that are just one size. Another thing that we do is, it might seem that we're a little bit conservative on how many blocks we'll bury. And that's because we've seen so many walls fail because of scour. And then gabions, we just don't do those anymore. Something that we're trying to do is use less plastic. Another part of our field experience has been seeing animals caught up in our plastic. So we need solutions if we have to use them, because that's the only thing that will work in that scenario, okay. But if we cannot use plastics, then we want to start involving that in our projects. For the consultants out there, I am really interested in this topic, especially knowing like lessons learned. Okay, so I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a feel for our more recent projects. This is one that started in the early 2000s, Fort Branch. And I'm going to go kind of slow through here because Morgan went out recently and we have some really great before, during, after, and then now pictures. He went out a couple of weeks ago and took some images. It's in Lower Fort Branch. Head cut problems galore, usual. And we were able to do a CIP where we did that boulder toe, stabilizing with the boulder toe, and then a softer soil lift. This is one section. Another section, in the section 2, we did constructed riffles, and Morgan was able to, sure enough, see that these riffles persisted, and even it's a lot of sediment analysis in this one, and they found that the riffles were creating more riffles also. So kind of a growth, some bank stabilization, and still looks good on the soil lifts and even sediment bars. Another section is similar. I like this just because it shows how soil lifts are made, so a little process image. And today, it's looking great. The last stretch of this kind of long-term project was one of those plot twists that you get occasionally in your career. And so Eric led this also, but it was basically part of Fort Branch incising, and really incising in the unmarked landfill of incinerator waste. So now it's become more of a contamination project, but also stabilization. So we had to excavate 18 feet down and then fill it back up with a series of grade controls. This might be the most grade controls that you can see from space. I'm convinced. It's another example of where our projects are often like, what you see at the end is just the tip of the iceberg. So 18 feet down, imagine all the construction, and then when you just walk on it now, you just, this is a nice little grade control. So that's a different scale, promoting pictures during construction, so you can kind of relay with people in them. Another project that was in partnership with Urban Trails, this kind of gives that community aspect of some of our projects, is in J.J. Seabrook in Tannehill. Our landscape architect at the time, Susan Kensel, did some great work here. She was able to bring in stream restoration, water quality, and then really it's the middle of this kind of large few blocks of a neighborhood, so it's kind of creating this park, new green belt area. We always love taking out culverts. because they clog. So this was a case where we could take out a culvert, we could take out a whole street, actually, and we put it in a pedestrian bridge. People loved that. I really like this image. This is just a shout out to being able to visualize something that's not just off the shelf. So Susan was explaining to our contractor how to build this little settling basin, I think Nook sounds better. And she was trying to show the elevation. So this kind of like rainbow draft. Every time I run into this image, I just like that image so much because it helps convey just a design beyond just gray. This was an example where they found a seep, and the seep was really muddy because of the layer that it was flowing through. So they were creating a settling basin to help get that water quality improved. She also did a really great job with community outreach. I know you guys can't see probably the words, but this idea of helping people understand what they might expect at the end to keep gaining that trust in the noisy, muddy, dirty process. So I really appreciate that. Another project that Susan had her fingerprints on as a co-sponsor was a stream restoration in Waterloo. If you haven't been there, it's really a beautiful park downtown, super easy parking at the Capitol. This project was between 14th and 15th, had a lot of trails as a constraint, bridges, and the initial design from the consultants was really hard rock and not much green. That didn't fly with our floodplain modification team with the city, so we couldn't get a permit, so we needed to show ecological uplift. And what she was able to do with the consultant is really make our Appendix X toolkit talk directly to our design features. So this was more of a communication tool, but this is one of my favorite tools that she was able to make, where we're connecting designs that we already use and being able to do the check mark in our to prove environmental uplift. So this was incredible. If you're interested in these kind of figures, I love infographics, and I'm happy to share this one. So here's where it looks like a toolkit. Similar for the floodplain bench. I thought this was such a good communication tool because bringing these requirements into actual design has been a disconnect, and that was really helpful that we can build off of. Hot off the press, yesterday she did a post or a blog posting on this for the landscape architect group. So something completely different that we get into is we're also managing our resources within Barton Springs. So if you're familiar with Barton Springs, there's Eliza Springs, and we had a failing flume, box culvert, whatever you want to call it, this in Eliza Springs. So we have salamanders, as you know, and then also historic walls in this area. So there was a very complicated project. Thank you to Charlie and Eric Stewart for doing this. They lit this whole section thinking of having to deal with the historic permits and the endangered species. It looks beautiful now. And I wanted to take a little bit of a moment just to commend, I don't know a lot about salamanders, learned that they often like to come out of the aquifer, have a peek, maybe they get counted by our biologists, and then they might, if they don't like what they see, they'll go back down. This is one that in August, they did a count, and they found that there were 1,000 salamanders in 1 week, and they were persistent. They weren't ones that were just around for visiting. They were actually, they're able to identify salamanders based on their face. I was listening to a video he's like, oh yeah, salamanders have faces. I was like, oh, they do have faces. So that's how they were able to find that they're actually persisting. So this is just really impressive. I love talking about gravel. And so one little nuance is that the salamanders, a little bit of adaptive design. They didn't like the angular gravel that we usually use. So they ended up trying again and putting in rounded river rock. And that's when they really started to see that jump in habitation for the salamanders. So that's another kind of iterative design piece. So we've gone through the big CIPs, and now we're going to our other end of the spectrum of our field and our erosion crews. So this is site scale. Sorry, this is one more CIP shout out. Morgan was very involved in this. Peace Park. Many people might visit the lower part of Peace Park where all of the playgrounds are, but this is just a shout out to say, if you haven't been to Live Oak Meadow, 21 reviewers on Google can't be wrong. It is a great place where we can connect the stormwater treatment that has this beautiful wetland, one of my favorite education signs that we've done as a department. And if you go, don't forget to find this little staircase because you can go into the creek, and it just is an incredible place to spend a Sunday morning. So it's a little gem. Okay, so Fort Branch is a field engineering, so Chevy Circle, one of Clayton's projects. This is an example where we're, again, stabilizing a head cut to prevent all of that land loss, all of that wedge of sediment that also becomes part of the waterways. So we had field ops doing their solid block work, grade controls, got to make some pools and riffles. Good job, Clayton. Here's an example where we're dealing with a outfall, local. I love that they didn't decide, okay, well, it's an outfall that's caused an erosion, caused a head cut. We're just going to pipe it and let it go straight and kind of like fire hydrant back into the creek. So they kept it back. They added a little bit of sinuosity, so slowing the flows, slowing that erosive flows, built in a little bit of infiltration. I really like that project too. Everybody needs a basic wall, right, Jana? This is right horse for the right course. Sometimes you don't have space to do really large-scale projects. So we had a really big constraint. We couldn't even put geogrid horizontally to get that extra friction, so we kept the walls low, relied on gravity, and we were able to protect these houses, and it works, and people are happy about having their houses protected. So that's our typical kind of basic gravity wall. Here's another shot where in one image you can really see field ops do their riprap slope, soil lifts, and grade control, and boulder toe. This is another project Clayton has done in the works, or almost done. Another one that reminds me of a tip of the iceberg, because I was out there. How many blocks are buried under here, Clayton? How many are we not seeing? Millions? And what, they're 2 feet high? So I'm remembering 3, but maybe that's because I'm only 5 feet tall. But it's a lot of blocks that are buried, and this was a little bit trickier for our field crew because we also had a perch spring upstream, so we had to be careful not to nudge or create a fissure that drained the spring. This is a project that Charlie did in Avenue D. Here's where we come in with IDIQ. 2017, Eric, thank you for bringing in the IDIQ process. That helped bridge the gap between field ops and CIP. If field ops can't be on the schedule, or if it's something that's a little bit more involved, we will turn to IDIQ. We did IDIQ here mostly for the schedule during the pandemic. I swear Charlie did this work, great work in Waller Creek. I swear in some of these pictures, I can see like multiple crews working at the same time. I know this project, they cranked it out really fast. And that was a solid wall design. Oh, also wanted to shout out Charlie. Charlie's trying something new with biodegradable soil lifts, and so far it's looking great. So again, if the consultants ask us about this, what we're doing with biodegradable, let us know what you guys are seeing in other parts of the US. We'll probably have lots of questions on maintenance because we want to make sure that it works. But we are interested in this topic. Dunbarton was another project where we used really high, really big blocks. Reminds me of a moonscape. So the creek cut down, hit that bedrock, and then kept on having that energy, so it started widening. We stabilized that through IDIQ. And then the last one I wanted to leave on was sort of my favorite large-scale project, because walking around it, if you can look at the scale of the people, this felt the most kind of like Roman gladiator of our projects that I've seen in a while. Charlie did the in-house design. We did a bid for building, installed these drilled pier walls. These are 40 feet down that we're drilling, and it really was impressive to be walking around. Now, when you go across it, this is just what you see. So maybe we all should have X-ray vision for some of our projects. Our funding is through the drainage criteria, not that one, the drainage utility fees usually. But it's also not keeping up with our expenses and what the community is expecting. So we're also pursuing more grants. I imagine that as we're pursuing more grants, we're going to have to make more of those connections to our designs, to things that the grant wants us to uplift: community, environment, what materials that we're using. We have more collaborations. So if you're our consultant, more often in the past, running into a utility like wastewater or drinking water might be a project killer. Now, whether it's just coincidence or relationships that we've developed over the years, we're starting to partner on that. So instead of just removing abandoned wastewater, now if there's an upgrade that happens to be with a stream restoration, in an ideal world, we're trying to get all of those wastewater lines out of the creek, because a broken wastewater line in a creek is bad for E. coli and humans. Just some quick shout outs for consultants who might be interested. We have a design opportunity coming up for Sunken Gardens And we have the rotation list, hopefully, for fall 2024. And then a couple contractor construction projects coming up. The last thing I'll say is that we're going to end where we started, which is policy with a capital P. We're in this process of updating our strategic plan, and we're going to be leaning heavily on that to kind of find out what we need to be doing in the next few years. All right, so 30 years of stream restoration. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Questions?
Yeah, we do. Okay. Great presentation. I was just curious, what does the program see as some of the greatest challenges going forwards? And yeah, just how do you maybe plan for the uncertain future we're facing?
Development continues to grow, and we already know that there's a bias. So I think the amount of problems and pool, if we want to keep being leveling the playing field and get all the problems in, that pool is going to get really big. And so prioritizing that is going to be important. What do we prioritize? You know, we have a list of like 40 resources that we currently prioritize. How might that change with what the community wants us to prioritize? What we might need to prioritize for climate change? I think those are two big, the pool of problems and how are we prioritizing our big issues.
So on the gabions failing, do you have like an expected time for existing ones to fail? And like with existing gabions, are you planning to replace them?
Wait, say that again?
On the gabion baskets, you said that they're a sediment time bomb.
Yes.
I was wondering if y'all know like an estimated amount of time in which they fail and if you're going to replace existing ones.
I love to hate gabions, but I know someone else who also loves to hate them. And so since this is recording for people, Charlie, do you want to talk about gabions at all? Yeah, about how, like what you've noticed.
Yeah, just real quickly, you can, like on Shoal Creek is one place that you can really see where gabions, the classic gabion failures, mainly the wire will rust and they don't do well in high velocity flows where there's also debris, and over time they essentially just fall apart. But if you want to see that, if you want to see an example of it, there's some gabions downtown on Shoal Creek at 12th Street. There's a park there where that bicycle, cross-country bicycle park is.
What would you guesstimate is the like lifespan? I think part of it has to do like when there's a big storm.
Yeah, those may have been there only like 20 years.
Right.
But it's particularly where they're exposed to the creeks, the high-velocity waters. And so all throughout Shoal Creek, there were a lot of gabion projects done, and they're just shredded now. And,
shredded, that's a good word for them.
You can't walk on them, so they're kind of dangerous too. There's a lot of exposed wire and not very aesthetic once they fail. Then they were used for vertical walls. So when those start failing, it's even more of a problem because you already have that unstable geometry. So that's just one reason we're shying away from ever using those. It'd be rare that we do that.
Thanks, Charlie.
So we've had projects repairing them too.
So I'm curious to your reaction to Marissa's plot that she had in her presentation of the future projected population growth in Austin, because y'all kind of had a lot of legacy problems. So I'm wondering, are y'all changing any approach or thoughts or policy looking at that crazy increase that we're going to have over the next 100 years?
Yeah, I think there's kind of two avenues that come to mind. One is that we have the erosion hazard buffer. So now we're saying, okay, we might lose that land, we might lose that wedge of sediment that might get in the water, but we're not, at least the property isn't at risk. So that's one. It's just like, stay away, we'll let it unravel because we know that's what it will do in the current regime. I think the other way that we might be bringing it in the future, and this is something that Bob Hawley will talk about, is there are more cities that are talking about reducing erosive flows through SCMs. That's not in our purview right now. We're really repairing, but I could see that being more of like a preventative measure.
I was just wondering how y'all mitigate for trees. Do y'all use the same regulations for development?
Oh man. I have spent a while in the past month trying to make a mitigation tool, and it is the same as development. We have a city arborist who can kind of tell us quickly if something's DDI, which is dead, diseased, or imminent safety hazard, but it is the same where we mitigate. We have projects where we spend a lot of money on mitigating trees that we really have to remove for the project. So
where do you replant them? Are they on site or off site?
Sometimes we'll do the seedlings, and I think we get like, I don't want to misspeak, but I think we'll get credit towards the seedlings. And then Eric, do you want to say, or Morgan, either of y'all want to say anything else about tree mitigation? We're in it with the developers. But maybe we honor the trees a little bit more. I don't know.
Another shameless comment and praise, but actually got to watch this whole arc that you went through. I really appreciated the incredible presentation and how you went from the early days of this. And it was really interesting to watch this myself over time, to see the evolution. And you guys have just really paid attention to how to do things a bit differently over time and improve them. So fantastic. So
thank you. Shout out to Matt and Tom Franke, who really have been here seeing this beginning from the early 90s. And I think that is cool to have that be part of your career and see things progress. All right, I think we're good. Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it.